The civil war in the fictionalized version of Mexico in the Red Dead Redemption series is one that is drawn out, vicious, and by its final moments still had no real winner. And today, in as much detail as I can muster up, we're going to be exploring the events of this subject as we piece together the timeline of the Mexican Revolution. Also, please be aware there will be major plot spoilers ahead for 2010's Red Dead Redemption, as well as potentially some minor ones from its sequel, Red Dead Redemption 2. Welcome to the video. You're listening to Phil of Philby Gaming. If you enjoy the following, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, after watching, please consider doing so. Without further delay, as we've got quite a bit to get through, let's begin with today's content. The Mexican Revolution Explained. Before we begin with the event of 1911, where our protagonist John Marston somewhat inserts himself into the mix of it all, let's take a look at the history of the uprising and border tensions that isolated the country of Mexico from its neighbour, the United States. All of this information can be found in several editions of the Blackwater Ledger newspaper in-game, firstly beginning with 1899. The first piece of information we're given comes from issue 62 with the caption titled Mexican Border Dispute Intensifies. It reads, "Not since General Francisco Ramirez Torres seized the presidency of Mexico in the bloody coup of 1876 have relations been so strained with the US. Among heightened tensions, General Torres has placed troops along the border to deny entry to prospectors, cattle ranchers, and renegade bands of Indians who have taken to raiding Mexican settlements. In retaliation, with a nationalist tone, President McAllister has called for a ban on trade with Mexico. He said the US has provided resources over the years, including helping in ending the Apache Wars 10 years ago, and received little in return except hostility." So General Torres somewhat created a wall between the US and Mexico, and even though he may have felt it was necessary to avoid rustlers and raids, it led to the disruption of trading between the two nations, causing tension between both. Although both sides of the borders were restricting access, there were still some who managed to slip through the cracks, one of whom was a rebel outlaw named Flaco Hernandez, and with him his men. Raiding such towns as Valentine, Strawberry and Ansburg before its fall later that same year, this only further escalated tensions between the two nations as the US felt outraged that immigrants just snuck into their country and wreaked havoc. Following not only this, but events similar to it, President Alfred McAllister continues on with his determination to isolate the United States from its neighbouring countries by stating the following at a signing, which was documented in the Blackwater Ledger, issue 64. "We must keep foreign products from our shares. They strip our workers of labour, food from the tables of our families, and only seek to benefit rich titans of industry abroad." The president's reasoning for this, as he claimed, was because a typhoid epidemic ravaged and killed approximately 2,500 troops in military bases across the country whilst under his administration, which he claimed entered from foreign lands. It would be apparent that McAllister is holding this as an excuse to keep his country isolated from the rest of the world, blaming immigration for the epidemic, citing that the United States are resourceful enough to manage on their own. This wasn't a popular decision with local farm and store owners, as it affected them greatly in terms of produce. These tensions would continue for many years, even following the assassination of President McAllister sometime after 1899, as the United States fell under the leadership of now President Thaddeus Waxman. In yet another issue of the Blackwater Ledger, number 75, published in 1907, the president had the following to say: "All idiots, imbeciles, feeble-minded persons, insane persons, and persons who have been insane within 5 years previous, persons who have had 2 or more attacks of insanity at any time previously, paupers, persons likely to become a public charge, professional beggars, persons affiliated with tuberculosis or with a loathsome or dangerous contagious disease, persons not comprehended within any foreign excluded classes who are found to be and are certified by the examining surgeon as being mentally or physically defective, such mental or physical defects being of a nature which affect the ability of such alien to earn a living, persons who have been convicted of or admit having committed a felony or other crime or misdemeanor involving moral turpitude, polygamists, or persons who admit their belief in the practice of polygamy, anarchists." Although this didn't directly mention the bordering nation of Mexico, it certainly implies that the relationship was still at full tension. The passage of Waxman's wasn't just a statement, he had escalated it into a ruling of law. So as tensions continued between the governing bodies of the US and Mexico, even as we enter 1910, with the borders still restricting each from entering the other, Mexico began to have its own internal issues, with many believing that poverty within the country was a contributing factor, brought on by its separation from the US some years prior. A military leader by the name and title of General Ignacio Sanchez, who also happened to be the brother of Mexico's unnamed president, saw power of the nation. Believing his brother to be incapable of successfully running his beloved country of Mexico, he gathered his forces with intentions of instigating a bloody coup. The coup was successful, and General Sanchez usurped his brother, seizing control of a nation now under his watch. Making several propaganda-type speeches to his people, he promised a new golden era for Mexico and planned for big changes that he promised would benefit every living soul of the country. Although many civilians of the struggling country believed the hype, it would soon become apparent that these promises were falsely given, potentially to ensure Sanchez's leadership of the nation. The people of Mexico, after slowly suffering years of struggles due to the border restrictions and now falling for the lies of Sanchez, whom they backed for power, began to fight back against the recently appointed leader of their beloved country. A faction formed, gathering all of those who felt anger and distaste towards the Mexican government, which was led by one Abraham Reyes. As rebel forces began to grow in number, gathering more people in eventual hopes of usurping the president, Sanchez realized this quickly and brought in a strong force from his military days to repel the rebels. This fell under the leadership of one Colonel Augustin Allende and his second-in-command, Captain Vicente de Santa. Both Allende and de Santa had a reputation of viciousness about them, something that President Sanchez believed would be a required action to defeat the uprising of the rebels. Sanchez saw the future of the people of Mexico in one way: if you didn't side with himself and his government, you were considered a rebel. This led to many skirmishes across the nation, with often the military being the victor, but this didn't stop Reyes and what he deemed himself his revolutionaries from continuing to fight for the freedom of a country they loved so much. Details of such skirmishes can be found in the Blackwater Ledger, issue 55, in a caption titled "Civil Unrest Returns to Mexico," which reads as follows. General Ignacio Sanchez's government has been quick to downplay reports of civil unrest in several provinces. Although witnesses talk of large-scale rioting, protests and train hijacking by rebel bands, alongside government death squads and other reports of violent retribution, government officials describe events as little more than small-scale skirmishes between an increasingly confident government and the last vestiges of a rebellion loyal to the previous regimes. Dispatches vary widely as to the scale and extent of unrest and as to whether Mexico is moving towards a much-needed period of peace and prosperity, or sinking into another era of violent internal strife and conflict. Unrest in the capital is believed to have led to the deaths of up to 5,000 people, although one local official blamed events on nothing more than a festival gone wrong. So President Sanchez is downplaying the incidents, making them to sound nothing more than exaggerated fables. This is no doubt an attempt to save face. He also refers to the rebels as the last vestiges of a rebellion loyal to previous regimes. By stating this, he's blaming his brother, the former president, and although this may partly be true, the reasoning for the current revolution uprising is his current and recent actions and broken promises. In one last article, before we experience the revolution firsthand, we learn a little more of Abraham Reyes. In issue 55 of the Blackwater Ledger, we can read the following. Following a long period of uncertainty, rioting and sporadic violence across the country, it seems Mexico has slipped closer to an all-out civil war. A band of rebels led by Abraham Reyes has seriously challenged government rule in the Nuevo Paraiso and other surrounding areas. These incidents have led to some experts on the region to deduce that Mexico, long on the brink of another full-scale civil war, is now involved in a full-scale conflict with itself. Mr. Reyes, a nobleman's son born in a ranch just outside the capital, was educated in the traditional way in both Mexico and in Europe, where he was expelled from a Swiss boarding school after an incident with a chambermaid. He is promising to bring Mexico into the 20th century and improve conditions for the poor. Mr. Reyes also believes that Mexico should be considered a leading nation and take a more prominent issue in world affairs. He He believes the future lies in the vital allegiance between Mexico, itself a federation of states, and the most powerful empires of Europe and Asia, the Habsburg Empire and the powerful Ottoman Empire, and that together they can create an adequate union between the Eastern and Western hemispheres in a more productive and international alliance for many years to come. It is this foresight and intelligence that has endeared him to a large section of Mexico, and which is bringing the country to the brink of bloody anarchy. Following the uprising of the revolutionaries, newly elected US Governor Nate Johns decided to reopen the previously closed borders between the two countries, potentially in an attempt to rebuild bridges with the neighbouring nation. As this continued on into 1911, John Marston entered the mix. Of course, John Marston travelled to Mexico for his own reasons, but he was very soon caught up in the Civil War itself, as he fluctuated between the two factions of the revolutionaries and the Mexican government, in search of his two former brothers, Bill Williamson and Javier Escuela. I'm going to do what I can to keep this tale of the Civil War on topic, but John may need to be included at times, as he was a primary factor in particular events, but this isn't the story of John's travels. As John lands on Mexican soil, he's greeted into the country by either a trio of bandits and outlaws or Captain de Santa, depending on player preference. In either case, John quickly learns of the friction between the two nations of the US and Mexico firsthand, as both encounters lead to John learning of certain people's distaste for their neighbouring country. We learn pretty quickly that Captain de Santa, who's now brought John into the fold concerning his side of the Civil War, is quick to use what assets he has at his disposal, and just how ruthless he is willing to be to win the war in his side's favour. In the interest of not overextending the video length, I don't feel the need to detail each and every interaction John has with the Mexican government nor the revolutionaries, but instead discuss the overall events themselves, as mentioned earlier, to keep this video on topic. De Santa was a fine example of just how ruthless the military could be when either defending from or attacking the rebels. The militant men act viciously towards the citizens of Mexico, often burning down villages and towns, as well as kidnapping the local women for what they described as a little R&R, by delivering them to Colonel Allende. We also witnessed the cold-blooded execution of anyone considered a rebel, a method seemingly preferred by the government over arrest and incarceration. Finishing our time before moving on over to John siding with the rebels, we learn of just how De Santa treats his men when he feels he has no further use for them, establishing the persona of the man by betraying John Marston and attempting to execute him, before the revolutionaries thankfully intervene with the rescue. Now we experience things from the revolutionary side. We further learn of the dastardly actions of the government as they further kidnap the young women of Mexico and slay the men. Many of the survivors of the Civil War attempt to flee across the now open borders for safety, seeking refuge in the United States, aided by several US citizens who are currently in the country of Mexico. With some assistance, the revolutionaries begin to overturn their tyrant leaders of the nation, slowly but surely, seizing control of El Presidio, a large prison being used to hold captured rebels, capturing and assassinating the cruel De Santa for what they claim were crimes of war, and launching a large-scale assault on the village of Escalation, as well as both capturing and killing Colonel Agustin Allende, seizing control of his villa in the process. It is believed that President Sanchez, at this point, had somewhat fled in fear of his safety. Through these actions, as well as many like it, the revolutionaries finally take control of Mexico, now under the leadership of Abraham Reyes. Over the next few years, following the cease of a civil war, the nation of Mexico lives in relative peace, until the once trusted Reyes, leader of the rebels, slowly becomes exactly the same as those who governed the country previous to him. We learn of this in the final edition of the Blackwater Ledger, in a segment that reads as follows. President Reyes denies he's a tyrant despite massacre. Following last month's bloody massacre in a small town south of Mexico City, in which thousands were shot by troops while peacefully protesting the government, President Reyes has spoken out to deny rumours that he is a tyrant who has reneged on promises to bring peace to Mexico. Mr. Reyes argued that, although the path to democratic rule has been slower than he would have liked, progress was still being made. At the same time, he pointed out that the ornate new presidential palace was proof that Mexicans could work effectively to get things done together. Plans for a concert hall and other civic buildings remain in place. Mr. Reyes also denied reports of widespread starvation in the country, as he still believed Mexico was on the point of entering a new golden age. See the pattern that has emerged here? This is exactly the same format of governing that was held by General Francisco Ramirez Torres, General Ignacio Sanchez and his brother, and then of course Abraham Reyes. In total, the number is estimated to be around 100,000 deaths between both sides during the many years of conflict, and ultimately, aside from a new figurehead, nothing has changed in the country, except the amount of lives lost so far as the nation continues to struggle to find a suitable leader. If you enjoyed what you saw today, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. Do you wish to see me cover a specific topic in Red Dead Redemption 1 or 2? Be sure to let me know in the comment section. Thank you all for watching. You've been listening to Phil of Phil Be Gaming, and I'll see you in the next video.